or by chance. You are here by the grace of God.
Joseph was right the entire time, baby. I'm sticking to it. I'm gonna die on that hill. Welcome back to Villain Review, my bi-weekly series where I take a villain, analyze them, and give them a score 1 out of 10. This is a very special episode for me, people. Very special, near and dear to my heart, because one of my biggest videos on my channel, The Genius of Eden's Gate. In that video, I made the claim that Joseph was right the entire time, and for the last 3 years, I have been getting comments all the time saying I'm a sheep, saying, oh, this is how cults work. And instead of backing down, I'm doubling down. He was right the entire time. On today's episode, I explain why he was right, as well as take a look at everything else the character has to offer to give him a score 1 out of 10. Let's do it.
Prayed for wisdom. Prayed for strength. And I knew. I heard God's plan for me.
We don't get a lot of info about Joseph before the events of the game, but what we do know is that he grew up with an abusive father, and it was while his father hit him, Joseph first heard the word of God. A voice that told him one day the world was going to end and that it was his job to save everyone. He'd go through a rough adolescence looking for his brothers who got split up in the foster care program, but after reuniting with them, Joseph would begin preaching his message and pick up a decent-sized congregation in the meantime. His group being known as Eden's Gate. Okay, so this is where I start to love Joseph as a character. The idea that he is a prophet that legit heard the word of God. Don't worry, I'll defend it later. A prophet that misinterprets that word and in turn changes into something evil. When I say Joseph's right, okay, this is important. I'm not saying he's good. That's very important because the dude is as twisted as they come. One of the really interesting things about prophets in the Bible is that God never gives them full instructions, the full details on their task. He tells Noah, right, the famous story, Noah and the ark. You might have seen it portrayed by Steve Carell. He says, hey, you need to build a boat that can fit 2 of every animal so that it can endure this giant storm that's gonna kill the whole entire world. Moses, who, keep in mind, this is probably when people made their houses out of like poop and mud and stuff like that. He says, hey God, how the heck am I supposed to build a cruise ship that can withstand the raging ocean for several months? And crickets. The way I see it, and quite frankly the more interesting way, is that God gave Joseph this task of saving everyone by putting them into these shelters, and the way Joseph executed it is just the worst way possible. Instead of convincing those who doubted him and relying on God, Joseph turned to kidnapping and forcing people against their will. Instead of explaining himself better to his enemies and convincing them to join him, he turns his militia on them, causing hundreds of people to die. It is so interesting to me, and what's better is that Joseph starts to realize that as the games go on. But another huge factor we have to talk about are his 2 main siblings, Jacob and John. Corruption and greed in the church are as old as religion itself, and I think that while Joseph believes his heart is in the right place, his brothers don't care. His brothers don't believe. They're just using this like fame and power to carry out all of their ill wishes and all these weird fantasies they have, playing old-time music to hypnotize people, carving sins onto the skin. It is a super interesting dynamic, and I only wish there were more of these interactions in the game. It's probably the game's most compelling yet untouched relationship.
See, mankind is weak and vulnerable. And we are hurtling towards our destruction, and no one is willing to do anything about it. I can see that. You can see.
Joseph is such a dynamic character that changes more than Spider-Man actors. And more so than any villain in the franchise, we see him grow and evolve as different events happen in the games. And while I don't think he can touch the scene stealer and just the sheer presence of Voss, he's easily the most complete villain Far Cry's ever made. Even though he's better than his siblings, Joseph is still a bad dude. One of the reasons that I think is important is because he does what a lot of bad religious people do, and that is pick which sins are good and which ones are bad. It's very pick and choose. Sure, killing your infant child, sure, that's okay. Knock yourself out. Go ahead, buddy. Have a blast. Yeah, you can drug people to the point they're like zombies. They're like mindless ghouls and beings. Yeah, that's fine, dude. Go crazy and have fun. Let me know how it is. But defending yourself against a nut job that wants to kill you, sin. Sin. You're the biggest sinner. You're going to hell. Joseph does evolve though, and the biggest evolution is from Far Cry 5 to New Dawn, a game where Joseph isn't even an antagonist. Instead, he's really torn up about these terrible things he did in Far Cry 5. And by the end, he's like, yeah, kill me. I'm awful. I deserve to be dead for the things that I did. The fact he admits that in some way, I think is more evidence that he's right. Look at some of the craziest organizations, the worst organizations throughout history. They would never take the blame for the awful things that they did. They would always try to defend and justify it. They would never do that. Like, imagine if one day the KKK, the Nazis came out and they were just like, yeah, we fucked up. That does not happen, and while New Dawn is a flawed game, I love how it evolves Joseph as a character. And this brings me to the start of the video. Why Joseph was right the entire time. There is a ton of evidence in the game, but the most compelling piece of evidence, the piece of evidence, quite frankly, I don't think anyone can convince me otherwise, is that he predicts the nukes down to the second. I mean, come on, the timing's way too perfect. He says, the seventh seal is broken, and then nukes. And then the whole world gets nukes, gets fire, bam, you're all dead. People say, oh, that's not fair. Anyone could have predicted the nukes, the radios, the radio warnings. Listen here, the radio stations, okay, first of all, they say Montana's not a target. They say Montana probably won't even get attacked. Everyone knew about the nukes. It's not that Joseph said, oh, the world's gonna end via nuke. Everyone knew the world was gonna end via nukes. That's the whole point of the radio stations. But he predicted it down to the second. And even if he just got tipped off that the nukes were gonna go off on one day, do you know how impossible it would still be to time it that perfectly? It's damn near impossible. It's like if I said, hey, I'm gonna slap you at one point today, right? One point from midnight to midnight. At one point, you're getting slapped. Do you know how impossible it would be to be like 3, 2, 1, slap? I get slapped. It's mathematically just absurdly impossible. And people say, oh, maybe he just set off one of the nukes in Montana. There are not that many nukes in Montana. Look it up. It's not just Montana. This is not an event that just takes place in Montana. Otherwise, New Dawn would not be what New Dawn is in New Dawn. Also, he says several times that God is going to reset the world to how it was. Look at New Dawn. The way the world is in New Dawn is exactly how Joseph describes it for all of Far Cry 5. Also, he gets magical apples in New Dawn that lets you double jump and all this crazy stuff like that. I'm just saying there's too much evidence. I'm not rooting for him. I don't want him to be right. It's just the world we live in.
People say that I'm crazy. But when you wake up in the morning, you look at the same news that I do. Filled with horror.
This is the world? This is the world we built for our children?
So many slapper scenes because Greg Brick is amazing. Just look at the first scene, right? Even in the way the scene is shot and lit is beautiful and incredible atmosphere to establish Joseph with. It's such an eerie feeling walking into this church surrounded by all of these people that, you know, probably a few screws loosed, know that they're probably all gonna attack you at any given point. And then we get that choice to leave him or arrest him. And while it might seem like just a gimmick choice reference to Far Cry 4 at first, I think it's actually really important. Watch my analysis of Eden's Gate as a whole to explain that. It's a whole entire thing. When the helicopter's going down and Joseph's just sitting there singing, man, I already said he's right in the end, but the implication that brings is that it's almost impossible to stop him. And at times in this game, he feels like this otherworldly villain. Legit, some of the best atmosphere I've seen around a villain in gaming. We also have to talk about that scene at Jacob's camp where he's talking about his wife. Terrifying. The fact he's willing to commit to his idea so much that he kills his infant daughter is insane. I can't understate how good I think Greg Brick is in this scene. The fire, the quiet, everything is masterful. There are a lot of other great scenes too. I love the one in the Bliss dream with Faith, but we have to talk about these damn eulogies that happen whenever one of his siblings dies. The acting is legit perfect. And the scenes give us some of the best insight into Joseph throughout the entire game. I think Greg Brick describes it best, that Joseph is dangerous in the depth of his love. And we see in these monologues, he loves his family dearly. And yeah, they're awful, and he admits that, but he still loves them all the same because they're his family. And I think a lot of the sins he commits in this game are born out of the absence of love from his parents, family, and the world. In the beginning of the game, Joseph is pretty composed and put together, and by the end, when he's lost his family, we see him unravel. He's far less controlled and held together, but still holds true to this idea of Eden's Gate, the idea his family died for. He's also described as a character with lots of empathy, and I also think that that's really true. Time and time again, he refuses to kill the deputy because he wants to help. He wants to help everyone, but his own sin, greed, pride, wrath, they all get in the way. To me, Joseph is a man torn between two sides, one that is loving and caring and wants to help the world, and a man who is angry and hurt and sad and damaged, and sometimes his negative emotions disguise themselves as these positive attributes, and it makes for a damn interesting character.
Something is coming. You can feel it, Kane. We are creeping toward the edge. And there will be a reckoning.
Joseph is such an underrated villain to me, in my opinion. He's so unique in the sense of him being a prophet, and he's right. We can debate in the comments. If you think he's wrong, come at me, please. I'll respond. He's such a damn interesting villain, though. Greg Brick is amazing. I don't think he gets enough credit. He's not as good as Voss, but he's still damn good. And for all those reasons, I will be giving Joseph Seed a 9.
I know you are in pain. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh, huh? You're not the only one to be tested.
Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what villains you think I should review next. Have a great day. Check out the playlist. I've reviewed a bunch of Far Cry villains. There they all are.
Remember, God is watching.